Disruptive Innovation FM. The history of the future.
And it is another episode of Disruptive Innovation FM. I'm your host, Jeffrey Colon, at DJGEOFFE. And if it's Wednesday night in the New York metro area, that means we're talking innovation in business on the Spreaker Podcast Network. Also coming to you live on YouTube in our multimedia event here. So it is Wednesday, February 13th, 2013. And of course, I'm speaking after the State of the Union address that occurred last evening with President Obama. And the wonderful thing, I think, about that whole speech, and I had tweeted this last night, was that the entire theme of that speech was on disruptive innovation. The entire speech. I'm sure a lot of the, regardless of politics, but a lot of the right-wing Republicans probably don't even know what disruptive innovation is, nor do they probably, they were of course saying, hey, everything here is about, bigger government and taxing people more. What I thought was interesting, though, in the entire talk, and of course I didn't hear it, is what if you gave tax breaks to American companies that put 50% of their profit back into innovation? See, the interesting thing there is you have a lot of people who actually think that innovation drives job creation, not simply tax breaks drives job creation. So it's almost like back in the sort of Eisenhower days of the 50s, where you would say to companies, you can keep more of your money, we'll give you tax breaks if you put more money into actual innovation. If you don't do that, we're going to tax you up the wazoo. And that actually gets a lot of companies that say, wait a minute, we want to keep more of this for revenue because we have fixed costs where we have to actually hire labor, and we'll do that in terms of innovative programs and research and development and lab programs, etc. So there was a lot that was discussed last night, but I thought it was an interesting speech. Again, talking about relevant topics here, since every once in a while we have to touch on what's going on in the news. If we didn't do that, we wouldn't really be following our own advice, since newsjacking is such a hot topic in terms of social media conversation and whatnot. So on tonight's episode, 16 years ago, as of this week, there was this little book that came out. It was published, and I really think it's changed business thinking forever. It's definitely changed my thinking. I think it's had a profound effect on me. This book, of course, I'm talking about The Innovators Dilemma. That, as well as The Tipping Point and The Design of Business, have been some really interesting, fascinating reads. I really encourage everyone who's listening to the podcast and sharing it on their social networks with others to really take a look at those three books. But The Innovator's Dilemma, the theme of it was really looking at a wide range of industries. The author was Professor Clayton Christensen of Harvard. He looked at everything from software to steel to mechanical excavators. But he found something really interesting, and that is when big companies ultimately fail, and we touched on this last week, that all companies will eventually fail. I mean, yes, we have some that have been around for hundreds and hundreds of years, but eventually their business model may die out unless they recreate what they do. And then, of course, those businesses usually may last in name, but they're doing things that are very, very different from how they started. But when big companies fail, it's often not because they did something wrong, but because they do everything right. Again, Christensen was trying to talk about the fact that most successful businesses are trained to focus on what he called sustaining innovations, or innovations at sort of the high end of the market, things that make a company more profitable and make companies obviously bigger and more powerful and more efficient. So again, tying into the design of business or design thinking theory, that companies move through the mysterious phase into the algorithmic phase where they become more efficient and they sort of try to capitalize on this efficiency. Again, what it leaves most companies vulnerable to is they could be disrupted, usually through innovations that emerge in the lower end of the market. So the automobile has obviously been disrupted. You had expensive automobiles when they were first manufactured. Those were replaced by more cost-effective lower-end models. The MP3 we talked about in the first episode, how that was a disruptive innovation to the high-cost physical CD, which record labels were asking people to pay upwards of $18 to $20 for. People basically could get MP3s for free on peer-to-peer networks. We're actually now seeing that a little bit more in terms of movies. So interesting on how the film industry is going to battle that. But this is basically, in essence, this is where true revolution occurs. And for a society, and again, when we talk on this show, we talk about global business, but looking at things from an American perspective here for a second, for a society that has only really undergone one revolution 200 plus years ago, I think it's very difficult for us to undergo many of these revolutions within our business culture. But ultimately, creating new markets is a good thing for business, and that's really what Christensen was getting at in this book. But what he was sort of saying that was quite interesting about all this is, and it sort of ties back to my discussion earlier on President Obama and his State of the Union address, is that we have a lot of people in society that now sort of follow the blueprint. So, law school taught me how to do this. This is how we do it. Business school taught me how to do it this way. We're going to do it this way. We want to scale things at mass. Let's scale things at mass. And, you look at some of this, and a lot of this thinking, I think, had worked for a very long period of time in our business culture. But now we're really looking at the world of business where basically there is no safe route anymore. There's no way to really follow a blueprint. You almost have to do what I hear almost every single day now, which is we have to make this up as we go along. And the reason I think a lot of people have to sort of make up things as they go along is because you never know what other technology is going to come along and sort of hijack your market. So this is, it's sort of fascinating to watch all of this happen. And I can't stress enough how much I really enjoy this book. I know he's coming out with a new book in 2014 that he's working on right now, actually called The Capitalist's Dilemma. And a lot of that is him actually questioning if capitalism is the right system for business as a whole. It should. I mean, I have a feeling this is going to probably catch a lot of people off guard and questioning why he would be writing a book such as that. But I think the question comes up quite a bit in terms of the type of capitalism that most businesses follow: quarterly profits, looking at things in the short term instead of the long term. Those things I think do need to be rewritten in some respects, and we sort of need to move away from short-term profitability, looking more at long-term profitability. Obviously, by looking at and investing in innovation, companies actually sort of are able to ride the long tail, so to speak, using the vernacular of Chris Anderson, but are actually able to survive disruption because they're looking at the long sort of road ahead of them rather than the sort of short-term profit. So past couple of weeks we talked about a lot of different things that have affected businesses. We talked about the music industry. We talked about the publishing industry. We talked a little bit about the software industry. Obviously, there's something that actually came up based on the State of the Union address last night. The military. There are disruptive innovations in the military. What do you think drones are? Drones obviously are going to basically replace human armies in some respect. So how much money are you going, you think about how much money is the government going to actually put into the military budget when they could put more money into research and development and almost replace the military as we know it? That may have a huge effect in terms of the military-industrial complex, because if for some reason you are spending less money on defense because you can put it into automation, that leaves a lot of money left over. What is the U.S. going to use that for down the line? Of course, I'm talking 10, 15 years here, not talking in the next couple of years. But it sort of makes you think, if the country pays down its debt, it probably will have a lot of extra capital to invest in other research or infrastructure, or possibly nationalized healthcare in some respect. So even certain industries that we don't think about in terms of can they be affected are affected. All industries and all businesses are affected in some form or the other. So, we talked a little bit about the marketing services industry. We talked a little bit about reactive content marketing, how businesses are now moving away from sort of the 60-second television spot due to the fact that the DVR has disrupted television advertising, that podcasting has disrupted radio, and that there's other ways that people are being marketed to. So you have all these sort of disruptions within that industry. Of course, we spoke a little bit about how content marketing or real-time content marketing is almost replacing that, using social media platforms. I thought, again, the interesting thing was Mark Rubio, the Republican who gave the counter remarks after the State of the Union address, During his speech, he reached for a bottle of Poland Spring, and the person who I believe was tweeting from the Evian account said something like, "You wouldn't have stumbled in your speech if you had grabbed a bottle of Evian." Pure content reactive marketing play. Got retweeted thousands and thousands of times. Don't quote me on the fact of if it was Evian. It may have been someone else. It may have been Dasani, I can't remember. But one of the other water companies had done that because someone obviously was seeing that happening and sort of tweeted in real time and it got major pickup. But this is the world that we're in now. We're on a hypermedia fast track. Things are moving at a very quick speed. And it's going to be very hard for, I think, some businesses to catch up in some respects. Crowdfunding, I think, is a big disruptive innovation that we're going to see a lot of over the next year or so. And then we also look at some of the other industries as well that have been around for a period of time. We've always talked about automobiles. I mean, eventually you're going to have Google, which is not a car company, and Apple, which is not a car company, probably disrupt Detroit. They're building their own driverless cars. I obviously know that Detroit probably is putting research and development into that type of technology, but they would require certain types of engineers, again, certain types of skill sets to really sort of catch up to the research that Google and Apple have already moved into in that particular area. Apple, obviously looking to disrupt the smartphone market. This past week, Nick Bilton of the New York Times talked about the fact that they are looking to build the smartwatch, a bendable piece of glass that can fit around your wrist. Sounds very futuristic and science fiction, but Corning Glass already has the patent, has already developed the technology that allows for bendable glass. So it's not too far out there that we're going to see wearable computers, things of that nature. That is very disruptive in the sense of how we sort of go about our daily lives, in terms of the fact that most people probably will not surf the web as we've known it for the past 20-some years, where you would go to a destination. We're probably looking at more of a stream type of web, where content that you sort of decide on streams to your feed. You never have to visit a website per se. So these are all things that I think we have to pay attention to. And of course, there's many more industries that I think are going to be affected. Journalism is going through a big change in terms of disruptive innovation. Obviously, the publishing industry is going through a ton of issues. But the most interesting thing, I think, in terms of the talk this week is how are companies really responding to this now? I think a lot of this is really based on startup culture. We've talked about this for quite some period of time. And that's, we're not talking about people who are just coding technology or software as a service, but really the whole idea of, hey, we have a big idea, we think it's actually better than how people act now. Let's try to push this into the marketplace, and then it erodes the existing behavior or technology because it acts as, Christensen says, that lower end of the market. It sort of fills it in, and then it almost becomes mainstream. So you have bigger companies that are actually trying to tap more into that startup ideology, because they themselves are almost afraid of, hey, it's not a matter of being left behind. We don't want anyone to erode into our market share, and we may have to recreate ourselves on the fly in some respects. So I think that's an interesting phenomena to really watch over the next couple of months. And it's just sort of fascinating times, I think, that we're living in terms of what the business climate. So all of this, though, is interesting, though, in the sense that we also haven't really talked about the fact that what will be, this is a great question, what will be the disruptive innovation within social media as we know it? So, and again, let's continue this conversation on Twitter. I'm at DJGEOFFE. But you have a really big player that sort of has risen since 2004, which we call Facebook. And Facebook has 1 billion users, and it has a large amount of active users. And there's about 100 million people per day that access the platform via the smartphone app. So it's sort of, again, trying to pivot into an area which it did not initially develop from, since it was developed during the desktop era. But you look at Facebook, and it is the dominant player. And you almost have to say to yourself, what might come along and actually be the disruptive innovation to Facebook? Since Facebook really is big, I mean, large in scale. And the thing that's interesting about it is, for years, many people have said, I think it will be Google+. And I think they could be right in some respects, but I think Google+ is going to be very different from Facebook. But I think it actually is some of these visual platforms may be sort of this disruptive technology in terms of eroding at Facebook's power, because it ties into sort of, again, maybe the lower end of the market based on how people are sharing content. Because we want to look at how people share content and what they're sharing. People love to share photos, people love to share video. And of course, it's great to get all of this information in a news feed. But I think you almost have to go back and look at the behavior of how people interact with one another, and the fact that we live in a mobile world. And I do think that Twitter itself, because of the fact we're also now in a real-time, always-on culture, may be the disruptor to Facebook, even though it has been around for quite some period of time. Again, these things take time. If you look at most of the classic studies, there is something that comes out, a technology that's not necessarily, it's not actively trying to necessarily replace something else, but it does because it sort of takes that lower end of the market. So it's a fascinating topic. I don't have the answers. It's very fun to watch the evolution of all these platforms. And you have to remember, Friendster gave way to MySpace, which gave way to Facebook, and we might have millions of platforms in the long run. There may never really be a dominant platform per se because people might gravitate toward the platform of their interest. Obviously, LinkedIn has really picked up a lot of steam in the past year, and I think a lot of that is based on a couple of things. One, we're moving more toward an entrepreneurial economy, less toward an employee economy, and you want to be connected to other people who have similar economic interests in terms of how you can keep your business going, your personal business going, and how you can get things done. And Facebook just is not that in terms of an economic graph. So that's one area where I sort of see LinkedIn disrupting Facebook in that respect. But again, these are all theories. And as I've said on the past couple of shows, I think some of the, Facebook will, has put a lot of emphasis on innovation, and will probably continue to do so into the next couple of years. And obviously, they probably have a number of other things that they're deciding on doing that are probably very innovative in some respects. But again, it's interesting to sort of see. Pardon me. It's interesting to sort of see what will happen as time goes by. So we touched on the State of the Union address. We touched on where Facebook, what might be the big disruptor there. Again, I'm curious to know what your thoughts are. Of course, feel free to tweet to me or share those. Mention at DJGEOFFE in a tweet. And it should be interesting to continue this conversation as time goes on. Next week in New York City, it is Social Media Week. I have not seen many panels on disruptive innovation. I've seen a lot of innovation panels, but not many containing the disruption term or disrupt. Again, I don't know how many companies have really put a heavy emphasis on this until they really start to erode their market share and the walls are caving in on them. And by that time, it may be too late. So the report for next Wednesday, what I'll be talking about is where is emerging media going? Because it is a big world that is only going to continue to go places. And, the dynamic is going to continue to change day in and day out. And the pace of change is only becoming more accelerative. So we'll make sure we report from the ground here in New York City next week during Social Media Week. Hope you enjoyed the show this week. Again, make sure you keep up to date. Follow me on Twitter at DJGEOFFE. You can download the shows on Spreaker. And of course, you can watch them on YouTube. The channel is also DJGEOFFE. Disruptive Innovation FM.
Disruptive Innovation FM. The history of the future. Not by